My name is Hilda. 3 days ago on Ridge Peak, my own son, Damien, smiled for a photo and shoved my husband and me off a 90-foot cliff. Wind, sky, stone. I remember the taste of metal and the snap in my ribs. Then Henry's whisper cut through the white noise. "Don't move. Play dead." So I did. I let the rocks hold me. I let my breath disappear. Above us, I heard our son decide what our accident would sound like. And when the helicopter came, he leaned close to my hospital bed and said, "Some truths stay buried, just like Richard." That was the moment I knew two things. One, our boy hadn't just tried to kill us. Two, we weren't the first. If you think this is a hiking story, it isn't. It's a story about money, secrecy, and the kind of love that turns into leverage. It's about a phone in a jacket pocket recording every word, a nurse who heard what she wasn't supposed to, and a town that watched handcuffs close in a hospital lobby. But before the sirens, before the verdict, and before our grandchildren came home, you need the part that explains how a family gets here, how a perfect picture frames a crack you don't see until it breaks. Rewind with me. For 40 years of marriage, we built what looked like a perfect life. We woke up in a small, quiet town outside the city, where the smell of coffee and toast drifted through a tidy kitchen with sun-bleached curtains. I taught elementary school, second grade mostly, where children lost teeth and learned to borrow pencils with something like diplomacy. Henry ran a carpentry shop, the kind of place that makes the front window of the hardware store look like church. He had those hands, rough, nicked, careful. He could smooth oak so it felt like silk. He carved our dining table himself with leaves like the ones that used to collect in our gutters, and he inlaid a thin ring of walnut at the edge that caught the light while we ate. We had two sons. Richard was our first, 5 years older than his brother. He was the soul of the house, always laughing, always helping Henry sweep the shop, always insisting on shouldering the heavy grocery bags before I could protest. Damien came 5 years later. He was quieter, sharper at the edges. He watched people. I told myself that's all it was. Some boys are watchers. And I never said favorite out loud, not even in the privacy of my mind. I loved them both. That was the point of mothering, wasn't it? To share your love without measuring spoons. On Sundays after church, we gathered at that oak table. Richard talked about becoming an engineer, about bridges and load-bearing structures, and how a thing stands when it wants to fall. Between bites, he'd wave his hands and sketch trajectories in the air. Damien would sit there, picking at his food, eyes on his plate. Henry would tell a joke too long in the middle and somehow still land it. My sisters, Harriet and Irene, came some weekends with pies or casseroles wrapped in tea towels. The cousins spilled through the house like marbles, laughing, tripping, colliding. The men fixed things in the yard that didn't need fixing. The women swapped recipes and whispered about ailments. In the evenings, Henry and I walked the loop trail behind our street and planned the little future we thought we could count on. Grandchildren napping on a quilt, a smaller house when the big one felt too big, maybe the ocean once. Neither of us had seen it in person, only in movies and on postcards stuck to the fridge with magnets. When Richard turned 20, something shifted. At first, it was a corner of the eye sort of thing. I'd hear the boys whisper in the hallway and then stop when I came near. I told myself it was women or school or some argument about the car. Henry said it was normal, that brothers blow up and cool down like summer storms, and the world felt so calm around us that I let myself believe him. One October night, 25 years ago, Richard didn't come home. By midnight, his plate was still on the stove with foil over it. I called his friends. Henry called the neighbors. By 2 a.m, Henry and Mr. Gilbert from 3 houses down were walking the trails with flashlights and that clipped way men talk when they're not ready to say the worst thing out loud. At dawn, they found Richard in the river gorge. The police called it an accident. The rocks are slick with moss there, they said. He must have slipped. I wore the same black dress I'd worn to my mother's funeral and felt guilty about it, as if grief shouldn't wear a hand-me-down. Damien stood beside me at the graveside, eyes dry, jaw set. Grief looks different on everyone, I told myself. That's what you tell your students when they lose a pet or a grandparent. Grief is private and strange, and yours. After we buried our firstborn, the house changed shape. Our laughter came out with a wobble. We hung Richard's photographs in the hallway, and I touched the frames as I passed them, the way some people touch a crucifix. Damien softened, or seemed to. He brought me tea without being asked. He offered to sand chair legs with Henry on Saturdays. He sat with me on the porch when the stars came out. I told myself he was trying to be the son we needed. I told myself a lot of things. I wanted them to be true so badly that they might as well have been. Years went by. Damien met Melissa, a pretty girl from the town over. She had a bright smile and a soft voice and called me Mom almost from the start. They married in the church with the good stained glass, and Henry built them a coffee table with a hidden drawer because he liked the idea that every young couple needs a secret spot for love notes or keys. They had 2 children, my grandchildren, and for a while the ache of Richard's absence dulled the way old injuries do when it rains. Melissa brought the kids on Saturdays. She wiped counters and took my apron while I tried to fuss at her for fussing. Damien's carpentry business looked like it was doing well. New tools, a small warehouse lease, photos of built-ins and staircases on his phone. I took all of it at face value. Then, 6 months ago, Henry and I decided to update our will. We'd saved steadily than we knew, the way pennies in a jar turn into dollars when you're not counting every day. Between the house, the little plot of land my parents left me downstate, and our savings, we had almost $200,000 to pass on. "You're both 60, Damien said, smiling in a way that put a small cold place in my chest. It's important to have everything in order. Melissa rested her hand on mine and squeezed. "We love you," she said. "We just want to make sure you're taken care of." Albert, our lawyer, is the sort of man who keeps peppermints in a cut glass bowl on his desk and still uses a fountain pen. He laid out our options: trusts, beneficiaries, division among grandchildren. Damien pressed for something simple: name him and Melissa as sole heirs and let them distribute to the kids later. "You'll need our help anyway when you're older," he said. "It's cleaner this way." I felt the tiniest burr of resistance catch on my heart. Richard had once made me promise to let him take care of us if we needed it. That promise lived in a corner of my mind like a lit candle. I almost spoke his name, but the room had gone stiff and bright and fragile, so I swallowed it. Henry signed without fuss. I did too, because that's what we'd come to do. After that, the visits changed. The laughter got thinner, the topics thicker. Damien and Melissa talked investments and policies. "This house is too big for you," Melissa said, looking around as if the walls were old sweaters. "We could help you find a condo in town, something with an elevator." Damien floated the idea of a power of attorney, just in case, so they could handle our affairs if something happened. They used the word responsible so many times it stopped sounding like a word. I told Henry something felt wrong. He said I was being suspicious. He's trusting by nature and proud of it. He cares about us, he said, through a mouthful of toothpaste. There was a shadow in his eyes when he said Richard's name, like a cloud crossing the sun. I called my sister Harriet. She's the one who keeps family secrets in a coffee tin on top of her fridge and opens it only when the house is quiet. "Hilda," she said,
After I explained the will, the power of attorney, the sudden urgency in our son's voice, why does a man with a business that's doing fine need that much control over your money? I didn't have an answer. So I asked Damien, why do you need it? I said in our living room while Melissa unpacked a sack of groceries she brought without being asked. Your father and I are in our right minds.
Mom, he said, and the word came out flat. It's not about control. It's about love and care and family responsibility. The way he said responsibility, it sounded like the weight of a boot. That night after they left and the house closed back around us, Henry and I had our first real fight in years. We washed dishes in a silence that was not peaceful. I saw something harden in him. Finally, he dried his hands and sat at the kitchen table like a man waiting for a sentence he wrote himself. Hilda, he said, there are things about Richard's death I never told you. The floor tilted under my feet. I pulled out a chair and sat because the alternative was falling. He rubbed his face with both hands and looked smaller when he dropped them. The night Richard died, he said, voice splintering on the name, Damien wasn't in his room. I saw him slip out around 8. He'd been strange, angry. I followed him. They were at the gorge, yelling. Richard had papers, bank statements. He had been tracking the savings account. He said Damien was stealing. At first, just a little, then more. Richard told him to put it back, to confess. Damien went crazy. He said Richard was always the favorite, that he got everything. He shoved him. He looked at me like he was asking me to take his shame and put it in my pocket for safekeeping. He shoved him, Hilda. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't a slip. Richard tried to catch himself, and there wasn't anything to catch. I climbed down as fast as I could. Richard was gone. Damien was crying and saying it was an accident, that he didn't mean it. He begged me, Dad, please, don't tell Mom. Don't turn me in. I'll pay it back. I'll be better. I promise. My hands went numb and then too hot. Why didn't you tell me? Because I couldn't lose him too, he said, and the words were a wound opening. Because Richard was already gone. Because I thought maybe if I called it an accident and made myself believe it, it would be true enough to live with. I thought guilt would turn him into a better man. I told myself 100 gentle lies and slept on them like pillows. Did he pay it back? No, Henry said, eyes closed. He kept taking small amounts, then small amounts became larger ones, and I kept not seeing it. I told myself looking away was the same as forgiving. He got up, walked to the desk in the corner, and brought back a folder. Inside were photocopies of liens and late notices, past due letters with words like final and urgent printed in red. He said, I started watching, quietly. His business isn't doing well. He owes more than $100,000 to banks and suppliers. And that's just what leaves paper trails. Something cold settled over my shoulders like a wet shawl. Does Melissa know? I think she knows enough to help, Henry said. She steers every conversation toward money, life insurance, appraisals. She asks numbers disguised as kindness. The phone rang while Henry and I stared at each other with the same thought. It was Damien. Mom, he said, bright as a brochure. Melissa and I were thinking, your 40th anniversary is coming up. You two always wanted to see the mountains. Let us take you next weekend. Family hike, photos, picnic, the works. After we hung up, Henry and I sat in a silence that had shape and weight. We both knew what the invitation was. We both knew what saying no would invite in its place. Fire can be an accident. So can a loose stair tread. At least in the mountains, we could see what we were walking into. Henry said he'd hide his phone and set it to record. He wrote a letter to Harriet and tucked it where we keep birth certificates and warranties and the kids' old report cards. In the letter, he wrote Richard's name and the words he'd been swallowing for 25 years. He wrote, if we don't come back, here is why.
On Saturday, Damien came to the door whistling. "Morning, lovebirds," he called, using a word that made me feel suddenly terribly old. Melissa stood behind him with a new camera and a basket of food. On the kitchen table, he spread a map of the trail like a salesman. "There's a lookout where you can see the whole valley," he said. "People say the view is spectacular." He said spectacular like it had an echo.
In the car, Melissa sang to the radio and complimented the sky. Damien drove as if a police car were on his bumper. Henry squeezed my hand once, then slipped his phone into the side pocket of his jacket and tapped the screen with his thumb. The way his mouth tightened told me it was recording. The trails started soft and green. The air smelt like pine and old rain. We walked past families with toddlers, teenagers snapping pictures of mushrooms and trees, a couple with a tiny dog that wore a red bandana and pranced like it owned the forest. Melissa took photos of everything: ferns, wildflowers, the backs of our heads. "Look over here," she said. "The light is gorgeous through these branches." After an hour, the path narrowed and rose. Roots cross-hatched the dirt. My legs felt heavy, and Henry's breath came with a little whistle on the exhale. We waited for one of them to call it off, to say the lookout was too far, to suggest the picnic instead. They didn't. Eventually, Melissa stopped and pointed to a rocky spur off the main trail. "We could climb up there for a better shot," she said. "It'll only take a minute." From where we stood, the spur looked like a ramp into the light with a cliff at the end of it. The rocks were loose, bleached with sun. There were no trees on the edge to grab if you misjudged your step. "I don't know," I said. "Come on, Mom," Damien said, gentler than he felt. "We'll help." We climbed. At the top, the world opened. The valley unrolled below like a map. The river braided silver in the distance. When I stood a little too close to the edge, my stomach went down before the rest of me followed. "Stand there," Melissa said. "Arms around each other. One more step back." Henry and I did as we were told, the way old habits tell you to be polite, even when your bones are screaming. Melissa raised the camera. Damien stood behind us with his hands out. "Smile," she said. He shoved. Time can stretch, but it doesn't break. We fell together, grabbing at air. I felt Henry's fingers catch Damien's wrist in a wild swing. I heard Henry shout, raw and strange, "If we're going, you're coming with us." For a breath, all four of us hung between gravity and God, and then we weren't hanging anymore. The fall wasn't a single thing, it was a staccato of impacts. Shoulder, hip, elbow, the hard clang of a rock against the back of my head. When we stopped, the sky was enormous. The taste in my mouth was metal. My right arm burned and my ribs felt like kindling. Somewhere to my left, Henry made a sound that was more air than voice. Somewhere to my right, Melissa was crying, high and thin, and Damien was cursing. "Don't move," Henry whispered, and it wasn't a suggestion. "Play dead." I went still. I slowed my breathing until my chest hardly moved. I empty-eyed the sky. The colors around the edges of my vision pulsed like bruises. Somewhere close, small stones ticked down the slope like a clock no one had wound. After a minute, Damien crawled near enough that I could smell his sweat. "They're dead," he said, "both of them." You can tell when a man is lying to himself. His voice is too convincing. He sold the lie to himself first, then to Melissa. "Perfect," she said through her teeth. "We call for help. We tell them what we decided, right? The rock came loose. He tripped. He pulled her. We tried to help. We all fell. We stick to it. We watch our words." They started to crawl. Their voices faded into the rock and brush. The sun burned my face. An insect walked across my cheek like it owned me. Every instinct I had screamed to sit up and scream back. I didn't move. When the sound of their voices was gone, I turned my head a fraction. "Henry?" I whispered. "I'm here," he breathed. "Legs broken, ribs maybe. You?" My arm. Head. I licked my lips and tasted blood and grit. Your phone? Still on me. Still recording. The words were a relief and a threat. Evidence can save you. It can also get you killed if the wrong people see you have it. We lay there for what could have been an hour or a year. When the chopper came, the air thumped and dragged at my hair. There were voices, ropes, boots scuffing against rock. A man's voice, calm, practiced, said, "Two down here." Hands pressed my neck, my wrist. Fingers lifted my eyelid. "She's got a pulse," someone said. "Faint, but there." They slid a board beneath me, strapped me in. The world turned in slow sections as they hauled me up. At the top, Melissa made a sound that might have been grief if I hadn't known better. Damien said perfectly, "Please, my parents, please." He could have won awards with that voice. He had the face for it. Handsome in the way people trust without knowing why. In the helicopter, the lights were too bright. The paramedic's voice was a kindness I hadn't felt all day. "Hold on, ma'am," he said. "We're almost there." In the emergency bay, the fluorescent lights turned everyone into a ghost. They cut my sleeve away. They pressed on my ribs. They spoke in numbers. I kept my eyes closed and let my body be a body. When they left me, I heard the door open again and felt two familiar shapes approach the bed. "Mom," Damien whispered, lips close to my ear. "If you can hear me, I love you. I'm so sorry." There was a sweetness over poison in his voice, like fruit soaked in something that burns going down. He got closer. "I hope you've learned your lesson. You should have left our business alone. Some truths stay buried, just like Richard." He said my firstborn's name like a dare and a warning at once. The nurse in the room, Inns, according to her badge, stiffened. People can act like statues when they're shocked, and she did. Melissa tugged on Damien's sleeve. She said, "What? What did you say?" In a hiss that tried to hide fear under anger. "Why would you—" "It's nothing," Damien said too fast. She can't hear. Let's go." They left. The room breathed again. A minute later, Inns stood by my bed, leaned over the monitor like she was reading it, and whispered, "If you can hear me, move your finger." I moved it once. "If you're in danger from those two people, move it 3 times." I moved it 3 times. She swallowed. "Okay," she said, in a normal voice, because normal was safer for both of us. "I'm going to find the doctor." When she came back, the doctor was with her, and 2 police officers stood behind them. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, voice low, eyes steady, "I'm Detective Johnson. If you can open your eyes, I'll make sure they can't get within a mile of you." I opened my eyes. The room swam, then steadied. Inns looked close to tears, but the brave kind. "What happened on that mountain?" I asked. "My son and his wife pushed us," I said. The words came from far away, like I was telling someone else's story. Henry was awake by then in the next room, and when the detective asked, he handed over his phone, still warm from his pocket. "Everything is on there," he said. "Their plan, their words." The next hours were an odd mixture of police work and medicine. They scanned my head and immobilized my shoulder and bound Henry's ribs and set his leg. In between, they took statements. Another team sat somewhere in the hospital with Henry's phone, copying the audio into evidence and transcribing.
In a corner of my mind, I saw Henry sitting at our kitchen table with his head in his hands and understood that this was a kind of penance he'd finally come to claim. Damien and Melissa waited downstairs in a room filled with plastic chairs and magazines about gardens. They probably held hands because it looked good on camera. They probably cried the right amount. They didn't know the script had flipped. Detective Johnson came back in with a folder under his arm and a look that said he wished he could be kinder with the truth and couldn't. We pulled some threads. Your son's business is underwater. He owes more than $100,000 to banks and suppliers, and there's money we can't track yet. We also obtained some quick warrants. Turns out he's been recording conversations with you and your husband, likely to see how much you suspected. And we have something else. Forged signatures on a couple of authorization forms aimed at your bank. If you died today, he'd have moved fast. Are you going to arrest them here? I asked. I'm not a dramatic person, but survival stripped everything down to clean lines. As soon as I have the paperwork, he said. Officers are already in position. From my window, I could see a slice of the parking lot and the hedge of yew shrubs along the sidewalk. When the officers moved in, I saw the moment the story broke in Damien's face. The mask faltered. His hands flew up, then down, then he tried to smile because he'd always been able to fix everything with a smile. Damien Black and Melissa Black, you are under arrest for the murder of Richard Black and the attempted murder of Hilda and Henry Black.
That's impossible, Damien said, and the words were a confession even if he didn't mean them to be. We saw them. He stopped. He realized what he was saying and clamped his mouth shut. It was his idea, Melissa said, fast. I didn't want to. You picked the cliff, Damien snapped. You. The doors closed behind them. The hedge of yews went back to being a hedge. The news traveled quicker than we did. Our quiet town is not a place built for big stories. Men at the diner stopped mid-sip. Mrs. Crenshaw from church called Harriet, who was already on her way by then with a bag packed like a nurse from an older century, because big sisters never stop being big sisters. Reporters waited on the sidewalk outside the ER with hair that didn't move in the wind and voices practiced to carry the distance between tragedy and the 6 o'clock news. Do you want them here? Detective Johnson asked, meaning the reporters. No, I said, because there are wounds you don't want strangers narrating back to you. We stayed in the hospital for a week. Nurses learned how to walk around our pain like it was furniture. Inga's came by when she wasn't assigned to us with a cup of ice chips and a smile I will tally under miracles when I count them up one day. She talked about her mother in Nigeria and the way the rain sounds different there. I asked for her last name and wrote it down with my good hand so I would never forget it. When they moved us home, the house felt both exactly itself and like the set of a play after the actors have left. The breakfast dishes were still in the sink. The bed was unmade the way we'd left it that morning, our pillows still warmed by old dreams. The bouquet Melissa had brought earlier that week had wilted in its vase. Henry stood in the kitchen doorway on his crutches and said, "We're alive," with an amazement of a man who understands the math of how we shouldn't be. The trial came 6 months later. Between hospital and courthouse, we learned more than we wanted to know about the criminal justice system. It moves quickly and slowly at the same time, like a river with a strong current that looks still on the surface. There were hearings. There were continuances. There were days where I had to sit across the aisle from my son and feel the memory of his warm forehead against my palm when he was a baby, and also see the man who stood on a cliff with his hands open at my back. When I took the stand, the courtroom was so quiet I could hear the paper rustle when the court reporter shifted. I told the story the way I'm telling you, morning to night, like a day you wouldn't wish on anyone. I watched the jurors' faces arrange themselves into disbelief and then something stronger than disbelief. I spoke Richard's name out loud in public for the first time in a voice that didn't ask permission. I told them about the photographs in our hallway, about the oak table Henry carved, and the sandwiches we ate leaning on the counter when the grief wouldn't let us sit. Then I looked at Damien. "I don't know who you are," I said, not as a performance, just as a fact. But the boy I raised, the one who slept on a pillowcase with planets on it and cried when he lost his first tooth, I think he went with your brother that night. He didn't come back. The man who's been standing where my son should be is a stranger who knows my house. Henry testified too, which cost him. He told the court how he held a lie in his mouth for 25 years because he thought love was silence. He told them that love and cowardice can look alike when you're squinting through tears. He told them about the night in October, the papers in Richard's hands, the way Damien's shoulders squared before he shoved. The audio from Henry's phone did the rest. Melissa's voice on the mountain. Damien's planning clinical around the edges. The whisper in the hospital, Richard's name like a weapon. When the prosecutor played the recording, the courtroom changed shape. It's one thing to hear a story and another to hear the people in it. The jury deliberated for 3 days. They found Damien guilty of first-degree murder for Richard and first-degree attempted murder for me and Henry. They found Melissa guilty as an accomplice. The judge sentenced them both to life without the possibility of parole. I cried in a way that didn't look like crying, silent with my hands flat on my knees because relief can feel like grief when it shows up in the same clothes. A week later, the royalty money from Richard's notes started to come in. After the verdict, people who hadn't spoken to us in years hugged us too tightly in the grocery store. People we didn't know sent letters that began, "Dear Mrs. Black, I don't know you, but..." Reporters knocked softer, then stopped. Harriet brought meals until our freezer was a rainbow of Tupperware. My sister Irene prayed with me on the phone and told me God holds mothers in a special pocket of his jacket. I don't know what I believe about all of that, but the image helped when the house was too quiet. We began the process to adopt our grandchildren. They had been placed with a foster family while everything shook out, a good family that let us visit and didn't hoard the children like some do. The kids were confused, then angry, then still. We answered what we could and left out what we had to. You can't tell a 7-year-old that her mother stood on a cliff and watched her grandparents fall. You find simpler words that are true enough.
At night, when the kids sleep in their beds down the hall and Henry snores in a rhythm I've known for 4 decades, I walk the hallway where Richard's photographs hang. I tell him what I should have said years ago. I tell him I'm sorry. I tell him that his brother killed him and that his father and I carried a lie like a stone in our mouths and that we finally spit it out and it broke a window and let some air in. I touch the frames the way I used to. Some habits are more like prayers than chores. One afternoon, when the sky was the same clear blue it had been the day of the hike, Henry went out to the workshop. He can't work long now. His leg aches in the morning, and he's learned to respect it. But he wanted to make something. He came back with a small box carved from oak and walnut, the two woods he loves best. Inside was a piece of paper. On it, he'd written in his careful, heavy hand, "Truth and documentation save lives." He slid the box to me the way he used to slide a cup of coffee across the table when I was grading papers late. "For the kids," he said. "For us." We talk sometimes about moving, but we stay. The house is full of ghosts, and so is the town, and so is every place if you stay long enough. I plant flowers in the front bed. Henry fixes a chair with a wobble. The children come home from school with projects made of glue and glitter that gets into everything and never truly leaves, and I am more grateful for glitter than I thought any person could be. People ask me now what I would tell someone who suspects that the story in their family isn't the story they've been told. I tell them, listen to the way your body knows before your brain agrees. Pay attention when kindness is a little too practiced, when generosity comes with a spreadsheet. Keep records, leave letters where someone can find them. Say the names of the dead out loud. Ask hard questions kindly, and then ask them again. Love doesn't require you to be blind. In fact, love kneels down and turns on the lamp. If you're wondering about Melissa's camera, the one she held like a trophy on the mountain, the police have it. They found nothing helpful on the memory card. Photographs can lie by omission. Audio is different. It catches breaths you didn't mean to take. If you're wondering about Damien's business, the shop is shuttered. The sign Henry made for him hangs crooked in a storage unit somewhere. Sometimes we drive by, and I look away before we pass it. And sometimes I make myself look because not looking is how we got here. The children ask about their parents less than I expect and more than I want. When they do, I tell them that their mom and dad made choices that hurt a lot of people and that the grown-up world has a place where we put people who hurt other people so they can't do it again. I tell them our family is bigger than it used to be and smaller than it should have been. I tell them about their Uncle Richard. I show him his photo in a cap and gown and the one where he's holding a trout he caught with Henry with both hands like a treasure. I tell him how he laughed. I tell him about load-bearing structures. I tell them that some things stand when they want to fall because what holds them up is stronger than gravity. Last week, 7 months after the trial, we had dinner at the oak table under the walnut ring Henry inlaid all those years ago. Harriet brought rolls warm from the oven, and Irene brought a salad with strawberries and nuts the kids picked out and lined up like a science experiment. After Grace, the little one asked for a story. "Tell me the mountain story," she said, because that's what children do with nightmares. They make them into stories, and stories into something they can hold. I looked at Henry, and he looked at me, and we told a smaller story that fit into their ears. We told them about how Grandpa had a good idea, and how Grandma listened, and how together we did the scariest thing grown-ups can do. We pretended to be something we weren't so we could live to tell the truth. I lie awake some nights and think about that fall, the seconds inside the seconds, the air around my body and the way it felt to be suspended between places. People say your life flashes before your eyes, but mine didn't. What flashed was 1,000 small things. The walnut ring on the table, the second grade classroom hamster's name Pancake, the sound my sister Harriet makes when she answers the phone late, the way Henry's breath catches when he tries to dance with me in the kitchen. I remember the exact color of the sky, a blue you only see when you're looking up from a place you're not sure you'll come back from. When we finally slept without waking every hour, when the house remembered what normal footsteps sound like, I opened a shoebox in the hall closet and found an envelope with Harriet's name written on the front in Henry's hand. I knew what was in it. I'd watched him write it before the hike. I sat on the stairs and read it anyway. It was short. It said, "Sister, forgive me. This is what I've done. If you're reading this, we didn't make it. Protect the kids,
tell the truth. The paper shook in my hand, and I pressed it flat again, like that might keep any of it from happening. There is a difference between being naive and being kind. I and Henry have both stood on the wrong side of that line. He kept a terrible secret to protect our living son, and in doing so, he unprotected the rest of us. I believed people when they used gentle words, and I ignored the way those words felt in my bones. But I also want to say this: we did not deserve to die for our mistakes. If there's a lesson in this, it's not that mothers should be suspicious of their children or that love is a trick. The lesson is simpler and harder. Love your people with your eyes open. Tuck your papers where someone can find them. Learn the sound of your own fear so you can tell it from someone else's voice. On a Wednesday in early spring, I took the kids to the river. We didn't go near the gorge, only to a shallow bend where the water slows. They threw pebbles and made wishes. I made one too, the kind adults make when they know how the world works and ask anyway. I wished for a different past. I wished for the same present. I wished for a future where my grandchildren will know that when someone tells you to take one more step for a better view, you ask what they want you to see. On our way home, we drove by Henry's shop. It's smaller now. He sold some equipment to pay medical bills and to feel lighter. The sign is still there, Black & Son. The unsun catches my breath. We're talking about painting over it. We're also talking about leaving it so that when people ask, we can tell them about both our sons. One we visit at the cemetery with flowers. One we will not visit at the prison. Sometimes the story you tell is the only marker a life gets. At night, when the house is finally quiet, I say my own kind of prayer. I say Richard's name and Henry's and the children's. I say Inz's name and Detective Johnson's and Albert's, who came to the hospital with papers and a face that had learned something from our story. I say Harriet's and Irene's. I say Damien's and Melissa's too, because names are not only for the people who deserve them. The morning after I came home from the hospital, I made coffee. The smell filled the kitchen, and the birds did what birds do. They sang like they'd invented the day. I carried 2 mugs to the table. Henry sat down carefully, like a man who has learned where his body ends. We wrapped our hands around the cups and watched the window. Outside, a neighbor walked her dog. Somewhere, a lawnmower started. Life turns itself back on, even when you're not sure you're ready. You know, Henry said, I think we should finally see the ocean. I laughed, because the idea of walking toward a cliff again seemed like the worst joke. He smiled. He said, no cliffs. A flat, calm beach. A bench. We'll sit. We'll bring the kids, I said. We'll bring the kids, he agreed. We're not saints. We're not symbols. We're 2 people who almost died because love and fear and money met at the same intersection and ran the light. We're still here. That's not nothing. If you're listening to this as a voice that fills a room while you're washing dishes or driving or sitting somewhere quiet, let me say one more thing before the story ends. The sentence that saved our lives was 6 words long and barely carried on breath. Don't move, play dead. The sentence that saved our family was longer and heavier and required more courage to speak. Our son pushed us, and we have proof. Both are true, and both were necessary. I tell the children now that families are like houses. Some are built with care and hold through storms. Some are built with shortcuts and need new beams to stand. Some have foundations that look solid until you find the crack and pour it full of something stronger than memory. When they grow up, I want them to know how to check the joists. I want them to know that love is not the same as silence. I want them to know that perfect is only a photograph. I want them to stand on the safe side of railings. I want them to keep a record.
I'm 60 now. I feel older in the morning and very young some afternoons when I hear a song I loved in 1984 or when Henry says something so silly I bark, laugh, and scare the cat. Richard would have been 45. In my mind, he is always 20, always walking through the door with an armful of wood Henry asked him to pick up, always laying a hand on my shoulder when he passes my chair and saying, "Hey, Mom," like a blessing. Damien is where he belongs, which is a sentence it took me too long to be able to say without throwing up. Melissa's there too. Their children sleep down the hall and clean sheets. When I finally close my eyes at night and the house settles and the furnace clicks, I think about the lookout, where the wind tasted like metal and pine. It was beautiful, you know. I can say that now. The valley lay open and the river braided and the mountains rose like the backs of sleeping animals. It was meant to be the last thing I saw. Instead, it's only a chapter. It's a scene with a different ending than it deserved because two people refused to stop breathing and because some strangers did their jobs and because the truth came with receipts. I said at the start that this story would change the way you see your family. Maybe it only changes the way you see the word responsibility or the way you listen when generosity arrives with a calculator. Maybe it makes you write down a few things and put them in a box. Maybe it makes you call your sister. Maybe it makes you forgive someone for being human and then hold them to a higher standard anyway. Maybe it makes you look down when someone says one step back and find your own footing first. I don't know what you'll do with it. I only know what I did. I played dead when I had to. I came back to life as soon as I could. I told the truth. I learned how to live inside a story that didn't match the photograph. I set the table. I poured coffee. I opened the curtains. And when the time came, I said my son's name, and I did not look away.